All right, so it's time for another project. We just got our generator working, and it was working great from the switch here to start and stop for a few times, and then it stopped working. And so started doing some testing. I pulled the switch out of the wall here, and as is typical, it seems, with our coach, there's lots of spliced wires and cut off connectors and things like that going on. So there'll be a little bit of cleanup to do here. But what I found was I could basically hot wire it on the back of the switch here, and the generator would start and stop normally. And so my wiring, even though it looks a little questionable, appears to be good. And the wiring back at the generator is good. The generator starts and stops on its own back at the switch there. But we really want this control here to also work, because it would be pretty handy to be able to start the generator and stop it without having to go outside in a cold morning, or without having to pull over and stop if you wanted to run the air conditioning, things like that while you're driving. So time to do some work here. I did a little checking, and this switch is still available. And so I ordered one just on Amazon. I'll put a link in the description of the video. Also found, as I took apart the switch here, that there are no connections to the hour meter for the generator. Now, this reading is probably for the original generator that was in the coach, showing 600 hours. I don't really know if that's a lot or not. We know it's not what the generator is that we put in, because we got that from another coach. But I still want this to work, because all of the maintenance, oil changes and spark plugs and all of those kinds of things are based on the number of hours that you've run. So I'd like this to work so that I can keep track of when I need to do maintenance on the generator. So I don't know if this works. Looking at the back of this, looks like there's a positive and a negative. So I'm guessing we just run power to this. We've got power to the switch that comes on when the generator is running. So that's what lights up the light on the switch here. So I think I can take that same contact and run it through the hour meter and get a reading from that. We'll have to see if it actually works, because that could be another problem and another thing to fix. But that's the project for this video. All right, we've made some progress. So I got the new switch from Amazon. So this is a Onan switch. It came in the Cummins green box. So it looks like legitimate thing from Amazon. While I was waiting for the switch to show up, I tested the hour meter, and it hadn't been hooked up for probably a long time. So I just hooked it up to 12 volts to see if it would tick up some time, and it didn't move. So that may be why it was disconnected, is that it hadn't worked. So I got a new one. It's a little bit bigger, and it didn't quite fit in the hole here. I'll link both of these. They were both on Amazon. But I was able to just shave the inside of the cutout a little bit, and then basically reinstall it with the same screws. And so it looks like it'll be just fine. It's a little deeper, but I've got enough room in the wall to run the connections. And so basically there's a negative here, which I'll run from the ground, and there's a hot that I will run from the same terminal that lights this up, so that when this is lit and the generator is running, then we'll have power to the hour meter. This starts out at 0, so it'll give me a good starting point for doing my maintenance and keeping track of how the generator's doing. So need to do some wiring. Need to put some new terminals on some of the wires. I'll clean that up a little bit. But basically, I think it's just a matter of hooking things up and putting in the 4 screws. Of course, we'll test it, but I think this will be a pretty straightforward project. All right, we've got it all wired up and working. So I've tested it. The switch starts the generator, stops the generator, and the hour meter is working. In the wiring diagrams, so I have my shrink wrap and things on here. I labeled the wires, but the labels, the switch only goes in one way, really, because there are 5 terminals and 5 marks on the back of this. So it's pretty easy to know which terminal corresponds to which wire. And then this is also on the wiring diagrams in the 12 volt, I think, house system wiring. It shows this switch. But basically we've got terminals 1, 2, 3, and 6 are the 4 that are wired up. Terminal 5 doesn't have anything wired to it on our coach. It might be different on others. But these are the same terminal numbers back on the control board on the generator itself. So all of these wires go directly to the generator. Our hour meter was not connected, and so it took a little bit of figuring out to find out what gets the negative versus the positive on the back of this. And what I ended up wiring to is the negative is terminal 1, and the positive I did terminal 6. So there's basically 10 volts between those terminals when the generator is running, but nothing when it's off. So terminal 3 seems to have power all the time. Terminal 2 seems to not have power all the time. It seems to be working. Maybe you have ideas of a better way to wire that. As far as the wire colors, ours have been spliced a few times, but based on the terminal number, if you look at the wiring diagram, it'll list colors, and maybe yours will have been spliced and repaired fewer times than ours, and they will still match up. I had to do a little bit of wire management here, kind of pushing these things down so that when it goes in, it fits and doesn't hit the back of the cabinet area. But basically, it works, and not too big of a project. Took a little bit of figuring out and a few parts, but we're happy to have remote start and stop for the generator.